Roofied Rohypnol DUI BS. When I was in Southern California working for Interplay on Star Trek New Worlds, and my divorce was aging, I had decided to go out and socialize with colleagues on some evenings and weekends. It had become rote for me. I would go out sometimes even alone. One fateful night, though, I found myself pulled over by a police car. The front of my car was crunched into the radiator, and fluid was all over. The hood was folded like an accordion. I could barely see at all. Everything was blurry and fuzzy. I had no idea how I got there, what was going on. The police asked me to take street side tests for being under the influence. I was apparently extremely under the influence. Having hired an attorney and gone through the court systems, I learned that it is set up against true justice. The court criminal system is a farce. The judge directed that I could go to court and face a jury trial for driving drunk and crashing my car. No one knew where I crashed, apparently. There was no evidence. But I had driven my car. It must have been crushed somewhere because the front was damaged. It was a mysterious location. No one called in anything. There were no reports of anything. But they demanded that I would be convicted based on my car. So I should take a plea bargain and accept probation and do 11 weekends of community service and some weekend jail time to make sure I was there to learn my lesson. Let me restate for clarity. I did not drive drunk. In fact, I walked to the bar. It was beyond wrong and evil to demand that I accept a guilty plea when I was 100% innocent, just to avoid the risk of unjust judgments and punishments that could destroy your life. I was outraged, but I was trapped. Blood tests would ultimately prove, along with doctor testimony, that I suffered a chemical mugging by someone who had put Rohypnol, aka the date rape drug a roofie, into my drink when I was not looking. Rohypnol makes a person appear extremely inebriated, reduces their inhibitions to virtually nothing, and eliminates all short-term to mid-term memory retention. Rohypnol roofies the date rape drug. It all became common as a tool to mug people in bars and clubs in Southern California in that time. Evil people roofied people and escorted them outside, whereupon they would take their money or whatever they wanted, including sex. They would leave the person to wander or do whatever they did, lost to their oblivion. They did that to me. I was roofied. I was left to wander, lost in oblivion. Apparently, I wandered home. I found my keys. I drove my car all on autopilot, and I crashed somewhere. No one knows where. Nothing I said or proved mattered. The court judge did not care to hear the evidence. He was intent on clearing the docket of the court cases expediently, and details took time, which delayed his finishing the day so that he might go home. Even with a lawyer, the legal system was rigged. If you can spend unlimited money appealing and fighting the court, they know it will cost them money, and thus they will let you go. If you're too poor to actually give them money, they will let you go. But if you're in the middle, where you're enough money to pay but not enough money to fight, they will go after you. If you cannot spend a lot of money fighting, you are at huge risk, and you will get high sentences, but with options to pay it off or buy your way out. But beyond probation, so if you do it again, they can get even more money. And if you are convicted of a crime, instead, the sentence is still based on ability to pay, and your time in jail is based on the amount fined. Therefore, poor people get lighter sentences than richer people. But very rich people don't get convicted. So there it is. Poor income and rich people get slaps on the wrist, if anything, while normal income people get the book thrown at them. What I wonder justifies shorter sentences and smaller fines for poor people than wealthy people. I wonder, why is there a difference other than profiteering? It makes complete sense to me when you consider the cost and the revenue. The government must spend a certain amount of money to make a certain amount of money. Incarcerating people costs money. Statistically, lower income people are more likely to reoffend, thereby increasing the time they'll be in jail, thereby increasing the cost to the government. It is not in the government's best interest to incarcerate serious criminals. It is in their interest to convict normal citizens. So they pay fines. And they can put them on watch and keep tabs on them. The court system is a huge government racket concealed behind the veil of the rule of law. Let's get back to my choices. Choice 1. Go to court and potentially face life and ruin. 2. Take a plea bargain and lie, saying that I was guilty of drunk driving. I was a victim of mugging, and I was being punished for it. Perhaps the worst thing on top of the injustice of it all was that I chose to fight for justice and righteousness as I always had. But it did not matter. If I were to go after this and get convicted, my children would no longer receive child support or see me ever. It was all wrong. It was stacked against me. I only had one actual choice: to take the plea bargain. I concluded definitively, life and the legal system are wrong and corrupt. Simple. Fact. Over time, I grew to harbor disdain for sheeple in the world. People are sheeple. They are sheep when they claim to believe in things but do not stand up for them when they encounter resistance or when they roll over in the face of the slightest conflict. Yes, I have resentment against pathetic cash grabs that violate people's rights or the original intent of the laws or services as they were first made. During my game, Escape from Hell, freelance game development, I lived in a large South San Jose, California rental complex of duplexes. Yeah, that sounds funny, a complex of duplexes. My unit faced the main street, which connected San Jose with Morgan Hill and eventually San Martin. Across the street was a stereotypical 1980s/90s suburbia shopping center with a massive parking lot, a supermarket, and a few fast food joints like a Taco Bell. The street was moderately busy for being otherwise somewhat remote because of its intercity connections. Inside my duplex unit, I had set up a work table square where 4 rectangular folding tables stood end to edge, forming a square with one corner offset just enough to create a doorway to allow me to enter into the heart or the center of the work table square, where my swivel chair was the god throne of game creation. Each table held one computer, each with its own monitor, display, and keyboard and mouse in most cases. Some of the computers did not have mice, however. I rotated between each computer as I finished a process-intensive operation that would utilize the computer for 5 to even 30 minutes. By having a series of computers surrounding me, I could always be working and not wait on the computers to finish their tasks. I would rotate my chair to face one computer, and then the next as I finished chunks of work on that one, and then the next computer, like writing or debugging code or editing an asset like a graphic image or a sound or a music block or a game script, something. And before rotating to the next computer, I would kick off or start a relevant process, like compiling and linking a game, or a tool to convert some source asset to something that could be used in the runtime game executable, or to convert graphics and assets like audio or music, game level data, scripts, all sorts of runtime things that might need special formatting. Each computer would take as much as 5, like I say, even 30 minutes to complete their process. By the time I had spun my full 360 around my square, the starting computer in the table would be done. And then I could start with it, and the other computers would still be working. And when done, I would rotate once more, starting my circle again. I found my work table square arrangement to be greatly effective. It accelerated my overall performance by being productive most of the time. Visitors would be dismayed at my computer setup and could not fathom how a single person could outpace one computer, much less four, and at one point I even had 8 computers on my square. Whenever people find themselves limited by their physical reality and space, I strongly encourage them to be open to the absurd. I offer my 8-computer work table square as an example. Who would conceive surrounding themselves with tables packed with computers in their living room turned into an office so they did not have to wait on the machine? I suppose thinking outside the box resulted in the work table square, which was like being back in the box of folding tables stacked with computers. As an aside, compiling and linking games became so slow and cumbersome that engineers resorted to inline, what they called pound including, of header and source files, as if making one gigantic single source file with massive declarations, headers, and source files buried in a huge morass of glued files. It was an abysmal and appalling situation, but slow computer speeds drove engineers to bad practices just so they could make progress. As an aside, it is interesting to think about how much faster and more storage computers have today in comparison to the computers when I first began using them. When I first began programming computers in the late 1970s and the early 80s, they had the following. They were generally 8-bit central processing unit or CPU microprocessors. They ran around 1 megahertz. That's 1 million computer clock crystal ticks per second, with a few CPU registers, which contain numbers and flags to perform math operations. It is worth noting that Radio Shack at the time was trying to come out with a computer called the Tandy. They eventually did in the early 80s. It was to compete with the IBM PC XT. It raised the baseline performance and began the PC wars. The next thing about computers back in the day: 48K bytes of memory, expandable to 64K bytes of memory. Some of them had 256 bytes of zero or direct page fast memory built in. What does that compare to? Well, we're going to get to that. But it takes 1024K to make 1 megabyte. It takes 1024 megabytes to make a gigabyte. 1024 gigabytes to make 1 terabyte. So 48K bytes is extremely small. Cassette tapes at the era were used to store those computer programs. It was a huge advancement, though, from punch cards that contained programming code operators and operands that had to physically fed into card readers. There were no floppy or hard disk drives then. They had not been invented. There were no internet or local area networks then. It had not been invented. Computers were blossoming in the era, but they had not yet dominated the world. They were rare. New computers in 2021 and later have had such vast improvements in their power and technologies. They are now things like 64-bit central processing units versus the 8-bit. They have 4 to 8 cores, which means they actually have 4 to 8 microprocessors instead of the single one back in the day. They are running between 2.5 and 5 gigahertz. That takes 1 billion computer clocks per second per gigahertz. So we're talking about a machine back in the day that did 1 million clocks versus one that does 5 billion clocks in the same time. Let's suggest 6 2.5 gigahertz cores were average now in 2021 anyway, which translated to effectively 120 gigahertz total processing power across its cores, compared to the 8-bit single core of the old machine. Let's compare that in numbers. Old computers, 1 million clocks. New computers, 120 billion clocks. Therefore, new PCs are 120 1,000 times faster than PCs of old. And modern computers have floating point coprocessors for complex math. And they have physics engines built into their graphic processing units, GPUs. They have vastly more memory. 32 to 64 gigabytes of memory is common. But we'll call 32 gigabytes as typical. So again, old computers, 48 K bytes. New computers, 32 gigabytes. Therefore, new PCs have 21,333,333 times more RAM memory than PCs of old. Computers have either hard disks or solid-state drives with storage in the gigabytes, billions of data, if not terabytes, trillions of bytes. There's just no comparison to modern storage versus cassette tape storage. Comparisons are incomprehensible. New computers are on average 48 times larger registers and memory addressing ranges too. New computer CPUs are 120,000 times faster. They are faster when they utilize the floating coprocessors and GPU physics engines. And they are yet faster again when you consider direct memory access for huge memory block movements or read-ahead pipeline instruction fetch and pre-processing. The conclusion here, new computers truly approach 2 trillion times faster than the computers that I worked on when I first began programming. 2 trillion times faster. In the end, modern computers are simply trillions of times more powerful than computers when I started out as a kid and as a young adult. And yet, the core concepts of how they work and how to control and program them remain the same. While living in that duplex in South San Jose, I decided to buy a high-end hi-fi stereo and turntable with around 750 watts per channel of audio power. A friend of mine told me of a wholesale outlet called Costco that had opened up in San Jose, and it had a wildly powerful stereo system and turntable and amplifier for the cheap. You just had to assemble it yourself. The hi-fi stereo and turntable and dual cassette tape player recorder with 750 watt amp was sweet. But I was not allowed to buy it from Costco. Apparently you had to be a member, and only business owners could be members. Yes, in the era, individuals could not just sign up like you can now. I was told that Costco obtained special deals as a wholesaler and was not supposed to sell anything that I bought from them unless specifically approved. So here we are today. Costco lets anyone join and buy their merchandise, just at different rates. So what did I do to buy my Uber stereo system? Undaunted and relentless, I found a way to find a metaphorical childhood hammer. I went out and created a fictitious business name, an FBN, called the Game Masters Citadel, or GMC, which, yes, is not General Motors Corporation or Company. I advertised the business formation in local papers as required to legitimize the operation. And with fictitious business name being filed and registered with the city and county, I returned to Costco and obtained a business owner membership from them. And I was able to obtain my hammer. I bought my high-fidelity stereo and turntable and dual cassette player recorder with 750 amp and speakers. If you do not know my story of the hammer, I told it much earlier in this tale of hell difficulty. So in summary, undaunted and relentless, I pursued my hammer, the stereo. The Game Masters Citadel, GMC, was legally formed just so that I could go to Costco and buy a stereo. I obtained a Costco business membership with legal business ownership. I still have that membership to this day. I purchased my stereo hammer and completed my quest. While I was living in my duplex unit in South San Jose, friends and I were playing Dungeons & Dragons on a weekend, as we often did. We heard distant police sirens getting louder as they came nearer to us. Sirens were not too uncommon, though, for our area, so we shrugged it off as a traffic stop, maybe an accident, something nearby. But more sirens joined the first sirens. Near and far sirens blended to a blare of cacophonous, eerie, screeching moans. The sound was obnoxiously piercing our ears, and we had to rise from our sedentary gaming session to see what was going on outside. Squad car after squad car flew by on the main street just outside our doors. They had sped by and away until we could barely hear them again. Believing the excitement had ended, it was over. We returned to our gaming seats and the table. But soon the sirens came back with their blended screams and moans. They drew ever closer once more. And once more we rose and went to see what was going on outside. Morgan Hill, a nearby city, 4x4 Trailblazer police interceptors had joined the pursuit along with San Jose police interceptor cars. They were chasing a beige mid-size sedan. I think it may have been a Toyota Corolla, but it was a long time ago, so I really do not remember for sure. A 4x4 Trailblazer turned in front of the fleeing sedan as fellow cars and blazers screeched and halted all around the apparent criminal. The sedan smashed into the blazer's side and the criminal driver flew into the windshield. We saw the whole thing. The man was dazed, and the police opened the door and threw him out and onto the ground. Officers drew their guns and trained them on the man, who was seemingly unconscious. He was certainly at least incapacitated as a crumpled body, motionless on the street. And the police drew their billy clubs and they pounded and they kicked him, and they kept kicking and bashing and pounding. The man never moved when they first threw him on the ground, and he certainly did not move as he was beaten and abused. He was defenseless. 30 minutes or so later, the man was placed in a body bag, head covered, and loaded into an ambulance. The police spent a few hours collecting information and evidence, and they cleared out, gradually, one after another. We had no idea or insight on what the criminal was, what he had done, what was the motive, why did he flee, what was so serious. Inquisitive minds wanted to know, as the saying in the era went. The next day, I called the police department to learn what happened, because we only knew what we had witnessed. To my surprise, the police department told me that nothing happened there yesterday or any time in recent months. They insisted that I was confused and should just forget about it. That was weird. The entire Dungeons & Dragons group, we all saw it. It happened. We had no idea what we could do about being lied to by the police. We mused that we could call Internal Affairs, or the FBI, or the state police, or someone to report dishonest and maybe criminal or murderous behavior. Newspapers? Of course, I had never had good experiences with police personally, and so the idea of my escalating to Internal Affairs or the FBI to expose police malfeasance seemed potentially risky. I could end up getting undesirable bad police attention, despite my having good intentions. And so we decided to let it go, as the policewoman on the phone call query advised me to do. Despite how hard it was for me to let it go, I had to. The next week, we found an article in the local Mercury newspaper that detailed a drug dealer that had been exposed in a sting operation but managed to escape in a beige sedan with officers in pursuit. The paper outlined that the drug dealer's route included Morgan Hill to South San Jose and back to Morgan Hill as he fled from the police. The newspaper noted that the drug dealer was intercepted by a heroic Morgan Hill officer driving a Ford Bronco police Trailblazer, who turned his car head-on into the criminal's car. It said that he died on impact, striking the windshield, and the police secured weapons and narcotics from his vehicle and his home. The end. Well, that was not what happened. It was not how it happened. It was possible that the man did die hitting the windshield on impact. But if he had not died, they made sure that he died, with baton bashing and kicking. We witnessed the truth, plain as day. The police chased a would-be drug dealer and caused him to die, whether it was from crashing into his car or beating him to death. He never had a jury or a judge. He only had executioners. There was no justice. There was no fair on that day. Maybe there was. We will never know. But for sure, the truth was buried.